Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the Russia-Ukrainian war. So, what's new? Well, obviously, over the last 24, 48 hours, there was a big to-do about nothing in terms of the, at first, alleged Russian attack that occurred against Poland. I know initial reports that were coming out of the mainstream media indicated a Russian attack was underway against Poland, and that was tempered to a Russian cruise missile hit Polish territory, killing two Polish farmers. Well, now we know that in fact it was, in all probability, Ukrainian air defense systems that were attempting to shoot down Russian cruise missiles that hit Polish territory. This reminds me of what happened way back on March 2nd. I doubt anyone remembers what occurred on March 2nd. Well, on March 2nd, a Romanian MiG-21 Lancer was shot down near the Romania-Polish-Moldovan border area. First reports indicated that the Russians had shot down the Romanian MiG-21 Lancer. Furthermore, a search and rescue helicopter with up to 7 Romanian military service members who was looking for the shot down MiG-21, the downed MiG-21, was then also shot down. And now we know in all probability this was Ukrainian air defense systems that were involved in shooting down both the MiG-21 and the Romanian helicopter. To this day, it's very difficult to ascertain information about what happened. Information is still being talked about that there were technical malfunctions and or adverse weather which brought down both aircraft on the same day. So think about that for a second. MiG-21 goes down, helicopter that is dispatched to search for the downed MiG-21 is then also crashes. In other words, shot down. In all probability, the Ukrainians probably thought it was Russian military assets. Now, I know some of you will probably say that the Ukrainians did it intentionally. Difficult to say. It would be in the best interest of Ukraine to get NATO directly involved in the conflict. The Ukrainians desperately want the United States or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization to establish a no-fly zone over Ukraine. Okay, so NATO does that. Then what happens? NATO aircraft are then shot down by Russian long-range S-400s or MiG-31s firing beyond visual range R-77 missiles. What happens then? How does NATO enforce that no-fly zone? And then if Russia starts shooting down NATO aircraft over Ukraine, and please understand, look, Ukraine is not part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The original idea, the concept, when NATO was established, it was designed to prevent a Soviet takeover of Western Europe. Western Europe. Not to start World War III over Ukraine. So very, very interesting to see how the media immediately reacted. Very interesting to see how Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, immediately demanded that the United States or NATO take military action against Russia. Interesting. So, a comment in the comment section, very interesting comment. It had asked, well, I cover how Russia could possibly win this ongoing conflict, but I had avoided the question of how Ukraine wins the ongoing conflict. Well, I guess the question really is what does each side see as a win? How do you articulate a win in this ongoing war? What are the military goals? What are the military objectives of both sides? Well, obviously, since the start of this conflict, it was very clear. Now, obviously also, war goals and war aims change as conflicts continue. And I think going into this war, the very first war goal of the Russian Federation was to remove the Western-backed government in Kiev. And they made a valid attempt, not a diversionary attempt, to seize control of Kiev. It was unsuccessful. I think these blue lines, these counter operations by the Ukrainian military answer the question of what Ukraine needs to do to win the war. I think they're doing that. They were able to stop the Russians from taking control of Kiev. They have essentially ended all prospects of the Russian military from crossing the Dnieper River and seizing control of Odessa and Mykolaiv. I think that's off the table for right now. I think any reasonable analyst would surely say that if you look at Russia's initial goal of crossing the Dnieper River, it was surely looking to at least take control of Mykolaiv and possibly move and create a land corridor from Crimea, the east of the Dnieper River, all the way to Odessa and possibly the Transnistria. They weren't able to do that. And the Russians have departed these areas and are now back on the eastern side of the Dnieper River. The Russians obviously had a military objective of taking control of Kharkov. Again, the Ukrainian forces prevented the Russians from doing that. So again, another victory in this area. So I think right now the Ukrainians are doing exactly what they need to do to ultimately win the war in terms of countering what the original Russian military war goals and war aims were. Now look, as wars go, we are still relatively early in this fight, in this war. Some wars go for 3, 4, 5 years. Is it safe to say that this conflict will go for 5 years or 4 years? No, we can't say that because we just don't know. But that's not to say that the Russians can finally get their act together and see some sort of additional victories with a modification of its current war goals or war aims. Is it possible that the Russians could launch some sort of counter-operation east of the Dnieper River, taking control of all territory east of the Dnieper River? It is possible. In all probability, we'll probably look to see that occur in late summer. Well, I don't want to say in all probability. I think it's possible we could see a larger Russian offensive take place sometime in the summer, if they fully mobilize. But the current strategy right now of slugging it out near Bakhmut, east of Kramatorsk and Sloviansk, the way things are going right now, very, very difficult for the Russians to win this. They're going to have to expand operations. I think we're seeing that to a lesser extent in terms of the Russians now are starting to take the gloves off. They're trying to go after the Ukrainian will to fight. They're taking down the Ukrainian energy sector, the ability to heat and warm homes in the winter. We're still seeing the Ukrainians continue to conduct rail transport across the Dnieper River. So that would be one thing that I think the Russians would ultimately stop at some point, but they haven't done that yet. But I think again, it goes back to what do the Ukrainians, what does the Ukrainian government see as a victory? Do they see simply taking back areas prior to the onset of current hostilities? Do they see at the end of this the Russians still control Crimea and the eastern part of the Donbass? Do the Ukrainians see victory as taking control of Mariupol and severing the land corridor to Crimea? Possibly. But again, it just depends on how the Ukrainians articulate victory. But I can tell you right now, as we watch what is happening, and as we look at the initial war goals and war aims of the Russian Federation at the onset of hostilities, again, war goal, war aim, Kiev, Kharkov, in all probability Odessa, Mykolaiv. None of that was obtained. The only real war goal that the Russians thus far have obtained is the land corridor from the eastern Donbass to Crimea in the seizure of Mariupol. So one war goal out of 1, 2, 3, 4 was obtained by the Russian Federation. But again, this is not over with. And I would say it is highly, highly a major mistake to count out the Russians. And again, in all probability as well, maybe the Ukrainians see some sort of regime change inside the Russian Federation as an ultimate victory. Difficult to say. I guess it depends if you're on the Ukrainian side. What is your version of victory? And I think only you, the Ukrainian side, could answer that. I would say if we're looking at this from the Russian side, I think we can reasonably ascertain that victory has not been achieved. Now, again, that's not to say that the Russians cannot turn things around. It would not surprise me in the least bit if we actually see that occur. But that's it for today. We will continue to monitor and report. We're watching the use of new weapon systems, and I talked about the R-77. I may have gotten that one wrong in terms of the actual deployment of that system on the MiG-31. The nomenclature of the beyond the extended range BVR that the Russians are using to some extent in this ongoing conflict escapes me. I'll do some research, and we'll talk about that in another episode. Thanks again for joining us today. More to come. Have a good day.